the ESA mentoring panel on pathways to tenure. So I am very pleased to have my teammates with me and our mentors. So Rachel Croson, Catherine Eckel, Betsy Hoffman, Laura Razzolini, Sara Solnick, and Lise Vesterlund. So we're going to take turns going through different topics about the tenure process, and in general about advancing your career. Let me see. The only issue is okay. All right. So let me first give a little bit of a background to this panel. So in 1998, January 1998, Lisa, Sara, Laura, Rachel, and me were assistant professors. And we were part of the first CSWAP mentoring workshop that was funded by the National Science Foundation. And so our mentors were Betsy Hoffman, who was the president of the University of Colorado at the time, and Catherine Eckel, who was also the director doing a 2-year rotation at the National Science Foundation. So our group has since then having monthly updates, helping each other until all of us were tenured. And then the meeting became less regular, but we're still good friends, and we rely on each other when we need career advice or sort of advice in general. It's been a tremendously valuable experience because we have a lot of focus on thinking strategically about your career. We got a lot of advice from Betsy and Catherine. We were able to broaden our professional network through each other. And there are also spillovers for generations to come. So I'm going to mention a couple of things. So for instance, after Rachel was tenured, she applied for an NSF grant and created CEMENT, which is the mentoring program now sponsored by the AEA that's still going on now. There was also a randomized controlled trial which found that being part of the mentoring program was tremendously helpful for junior women, that they publish more and they also get more grants and so on. They're more likely to get tenured. And all of us, after we became tenured, became mentors in the CEMENT program and in other programs such as the ESA mentoring program. So I am very happy that they all agreed to be part of this panel. And so what I'm going to do now is to pass through this slides through each of my team. So the first person who will talk about the tenure process, give an overview, is Rachel. So Rachel is currently professor of economics, but also the new provost at the University of Minnesota. So she's been the dean and the provost, and so she can give you an overview, definitely. Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you, Yan, and thank you everybody for attending. I even see some of our former mentees in the audience like Alessandra Casar, so big shout out to all of you. So I thought I would start off with a little bit of overview from a little bit from the institutional perspective of tenure and the decision making that happens sort of on the other side of the desk. I've now been in a position where I've seen lots of tenure packets and had to confirm or challenge tenure decisions. So people often think about tenure as a backward-looking process. Well, there's a set of things you need to do. You need to publish these many articles in these many places and get this much in grants, and then check the box, you're done, you get tenure. That's not how institutions think about tenure, and it's not how I recommend you think about tenure either. Tenure is really a forward-looking process. So this is a roughly $5 million present value bet that a given individual is going to continue to produce the research and scholarship and teaching excellence and service contributions that they have for the rest of their career. That's a big decision. That's a big decision for any institution. It's a big decision for a department. It's a big decision for individuals on it. So it's really what we do in the tenure process is try to collect and communicate and evaluate data from multiple sources on multiple dimensions in order to inform our best probability, our likelihood that this individual is going to continue to be productive in the future. Now, of course, part of the reason we do this and why there is some backward-looking component here is that past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior. And so we look to past behavior in order to signal future behavior. But past behavior, of course, is not conclusive. And so there are many other pieces of the tenure packet that we use in order to evaluate what's going to happen. I also want to put in a plug here because institutions are different. So different institutions have different missions. They have different priorities. For some, there's a much heavier focus on teaching. For others, there's a much heavier focus on scholarship. For some, it's really all about grants. But generally speaking, everyone is seeking to identify, are you going to continue to produce the quantity and quality of research that we expect of our tenured faculty? Do you have the capability for it? Have you demonstrated that capability? Do you have the inclination for it? Are you, do you like it? Are you continuing to do it when there's no longer this threat of tenure hanging over your head? And that includes grants and publications. And again, different institutions are different. Sometimes they value things like public communication of science or blogging or other kinds of activity. Right, will you continue to deliver on the teaching mission? Again, different institutions value graduate teaching, undergraduate teaching, professional teaching in different ways. And you will continue to provide valuable service. And service is a kind of a tricky dimension. People think about that in terms of committee service, but certainly when I think about tenure and service, I think about it much more broadly about, are you providing positive externalities beyond you and your own research? And those can be in your department or in your college or in your university, but they can also be in your profession or in the discipline as a whole. So as I mentioned before, past behavior is predictive of future behavior. And so certainly your tenure packet is going to look at your research. You're going to be asked to write teaching statements and research statements, and I'll say a moment about those. There's also, of course, evaluations of peers at your institution, especially around your service and your citizenship, and in your discipline, especially around your research and research output. So I do want to say a word about the teaching and the research statements, because these are both important and a source of much stress when it comes to the tenure process. So my takeaway on these statements is that they are so challenging to write because they need to speak to multiple audiences. So when you write these statements, they need to speak to people in your discipline, other experimental economists, to tell them about what it is that you do and why it's innovative from the perspective of they know the literature up till now and what are you doing that's unique. But they also need to speak to economists in general. So think about your department, right? Or your, where why is this research advancing beyond just your narrow field? They also need to speak to people who aren't necessarily economists in your college or in your university, right? So they need to speak to, if you're an arts and sciences school, physics and, English, right? And then of course they need to speak to all of the university-wide reviewers, right? At most campuses will be a university-wide committee. So they need to speak to engineers and people in policy schools and all of the different individuals involved. So they really have to be written, so it's complicated to write them at this level that they hit all of those different audiences in a way that they all find to be compelling. So I have a couple pieces of advice about those statements. Number one is this is not something you should just write in a weekend by yourself. You should treat this like you treat a major paper, even though they may not be long. So you should write them, you should get feedback on them from some of these multiple audiences, You should think very carefully about who it is that you need to communicate with these statements. The second aspect of these statements is that they often serve as a coordination mechanism for your letter writers. So one of the challenges when one gets external letters is when each letter says, oh, this person is good, but what they're really good at is X, and then somebody else says what they're really good at is Y, and then somebody else says what they're really good at is Z, right? That's not very compelling as an argument about what your contributions are. So in your statement, you can be very clear about what you think your research contributions are. My biggest research contribution is X. My biggest innovation the biggest finding or innovation in my field is Y. And that can serve as a coordination mechanism for your letter writers. They may disagree, at which point they can certainly disagree in the letter, but at the very least, they can all speak to that same aspect of your work, whether it's a methodological innovation or a substantive contribution or something else. So that's a little bit about the overview of the tenure process from the institutional perspective and some considerations that you want to be thinking about. And I think next I turn it back to Yan. Is that right?
Thank you, Rachel. Catherine Eckel will talk about tenure strategies for us. So Catherine is the University Distinguished Professor at the Econ Department in Texas A&M. So Catherine, did we just?
Of course. Thank you again, and thank you for putting this together. It's always so much fun to get together with all of you. My job today is to talk about thinking about your tenure decision strategically. The general advice that I give people is to think about where you want to be in 6 or 5 or 4 years, whenever you're scheduled to come up for tenure, and to schedule your work so that you get everything done that you need to get done. So what do you need to get done? When you come up for tenure, you have a portfolio of things that you want to have accomplished. And this portfolio includes a solid record of research publications and a pipeline of work in progress. Of course, this has to be this is, as Rachel pointed out, this varies, the requirements for tenure vary a lot across institutions. And so what this record of research publications is expected to look like will vary across institutions and to some extent across fields. So in some fields, some subfields, people publish a lot more frequently than in others. Grants, so a word about grants. In most economics departments, grants are not super important by themselves. This is in contrast to some other fields like engineering, for example, where grants are considered part of your research output. In economics, grants are considered an input, more of an input. So that if you need grants to do your work, it's very important that you have grants, but otherwise grants are not typically an essential part of a research portfolio. I tend to look at a really prestigious grant, like something from NSF or NIH as kind of like a top publication, but I'm sure that not everybody would agree on that. So be sure that you know what your institution wants. Okay, besides a solid research portfolio, you need good teaching evaluations. But I think that one of the mistakes that people make is, as assistant professors, is they invest too much in their teaching and at the expense of the other elements of their portfolio, especially research. I think part of this is because humans just naturally respond better to short-term than to long-term goals. And teaching is a short-term thing. You're under a lot of pressure right now to give tomorrow's lecture and to make it really great. I think that you have to be careful how much you invest in teaching, but you should certainly do a good job. And part of your portfolio will also include typically peer evaluations. That's when members of your department come in and watch you teach and write up something. So be prepared for that too. You'll need some service documentation. And why did I put it that way? Well, you need to be able to document the service that you do for your tenure portfolio. And so that suggests that it's good to select service projects that can be documented. So service assignments where there's more of a clear objective and you can get something done and write a report or make a recommendation or something like that. So, but Betsy will talk more about service later. And for letters, Jan is going to talk extensively about strategies having to do with letters, but you will need to ask people for letters, and it's important to understand what the criteria are for those people and how you can cultivate them as you lead up to your tenure period. Okay, so how can you get there from here? It's very important to think strategically. Just think strategically like you would about any other problem. Where do you want to be in 5 or 6 years? And set your intermediate goals. So to set your goals, you should talk with members of your department. Again, because as Rachel pointed out, departments are different and they have different rules and different criteria. You need to have a really clear idea of what your department wants. But I would encourage you also to talk to others in the profession, because well, one way I like to look at this is you really get tenure in the profession. And if you're doing good work and publishing in good places, and your work is meaningful to other members of your field and to the world in general, then you'll be in good shape, even if you don't get tenure at your first job. So keep an eye on what the profession thinks is a good research portfolio, a good tenure portfolio, and keep that in mind. So start with what you need at the end and work backwards. And by that, I mean, work all the way up until today. Since people respond to short-term goals, it's important to set short-term goals for yourself, for your research. Yeah, it's just really true that the pressures of teaching and adjusting to a new work situation often lead people to neglect their research in the first couple of years of their appointment. And so trick yourself into not doing that by setting short-term goals. Write down a plan and stick to it. Even now, I make an appointment with myself for research time during the day and during the week. Put it on your calendar and don't let anybody interrupt it. Treat it like a meeting, like a commitment, like you would any other meeting or commitment. And also be strategic about not letting teaching and service encroach too much. Obviously, sometimes you have to just focus on one thing or another, but it's important not to let your teaching and service commitments encroach too much on your research portfolios, which is generally the most important part of your tenure package and the thing that ensures your mobility if things don't go the way you want them to. And finally, I just want to say, I think we don't say this enough. Be a good colleague. Be responsive to and interested in your colleagues. Be a good member of your department, of your team, right? We have tenure criteria. There are tenure criteria. Every department has them, but they're a little fuzzy. And I think that it helps to have your colleagues like you. Not too much, but be around and be a good colleague. And I think that's useful. Allegedly, this is the total content of the employee manual for an important retailer. Use good judgment in all things. But I think that's always good to mention. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions later. Back to Jan.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So next we're going to talk about the most important piece in your tenure package, which is research. And Lise Vesterlund will talk about it. So Lise is the Andrew Mellon Professor in the Department of Economics at the University of Pittsburgh. She, I think, just stepped down from being a department chair. So Lise, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you all for listening in. I think everybody knows that we should be wary of the service that we do, and we should be focusing on research. I do think that these mentoring opportunities are the most rewarding service things that you can contribute. So it benefited my career tremendously, and I'm convinced that it benefited everybody on this panel as well. So I really, as much as we will tell you to watch out for service so that you can focus on the end all, which is research, the one service you should be doing is to make sure that you mentor your peers so that they understand what the process is. So I'm super excited to talk about research because it really is the reason why we're doing this to begin with. We all get stressed out by the research component because it is the end all, but that's why we're doing it in the first place. It's because we enjoy doing research. I think it's really important to take a step back from saying, what is it that I need to deliver at the end? And remember that the reason why you're there to begin with is because you love doing the research. There's this wonderful piece by a faculty member from Harvard actually, who wrote a piece in Scientific American where she talked about how she overcame the stress associated with being an assistant professor, and she just decided to forget about tenure. She just said, this is the most important, funnest experience I've ever had. I can just treat it like a 7-year postdoc. I get to do research. I get to hang out with these super intelligent people. I get to think about the things that I care about. And at the end of the day, I've guaranteed employment for 7 years. So I really encourage you all to read that because it just makes you take that step back to focus on what it is that we're doing when we're doing our research. It's a fun experience. Now, that being said, the piece is a little nonchalant in terms of how important research is, because of course you're never going to get tenure unless you get the research done. And there are a lot of strategic aspects to making sure that you can continue doing it after the 7 years of your postdoc. And I think one of the first questions to ask yourself is that if somebody is going to put that bet on you, what is it the bet that they're putting? What is the bet that they're taking? They are all trying to hire a specialist. You should be treating yourself as an entrepreneur. You're trying to become an expert in something, so that when people write those letters afterwards, they can say, what you're getting for your $5 million is an expert in this area. Now, figuring out what it is that you're going to be an expert in is going to make it much easier to become that expert. So really thinking carefully about what is it that you're going to be the expert in. You know, some people say you can only be an expert in one thing. I happen to care about 2 things. So there's not one particular thing that is right or wrong. I cared about gender, I cared about charitable giving, and I was going to do both because the reason why I was doing it to begin with was because I cared about that research. So really figure out deep inside, what is it that matters to you? What is it that you're excited about when you sit down and do your research? That's what you should be focusing on. Now, of course, you may decide that you're really interested in a particular topic. The tricky thing is figuring out, what are the real research questions? What are the ones you should be working on? And sometimes you get stuck. And the more you dive into an area, the easier it becomes to come up with those research questions. Now, until you get to the point where the research questions are just popping up nonstop, it's really to read a lot, to listen a lot, go to conferences, take time to think after you've been in a seminar, take time to question, did that make sense? Talk to your colleagues. I think it's a very good idea to write down random ideas as you're sitting in seminars, to just say, maybe I want to look at that afterwards. Now, a lot of the ideas that you're writing down in your little idea book are ideas that don't warrant anything more than just being written down on a piece of paper. I keep talking to people who say that they have a new research question, and the main justification for why it's a new research question is that no one has looked at it before. Now, the set of things that people haven't looked at is infinitely large. And many times there's a reason why nobody has looked at it. It's because it's not interesting. Okay, so when you get all your little ideas written down, be picky about the ones you're going to pursue. Make sure that you can put a question mark at the end of your question, Make sure that you fully understand what is already known, that you can explain to people why this is important. So this is, I very much encourage you to look at Sunder's list of what are the sort of criteria for good experiment. He has some beautiful ways of just making you go down and say, check, check, not check. Maybe I should go back and reevaluate. Will your research question change the views of other people? But most importantly, do you care about what you're going to find? Because if you don't care, you're not going to be driven to do what is required to pursue the research question to the end. Now, once you've found that research question, the first step as an experimental economist is, of course, to write down a very clearly specified hypothesis. And then as you go into planning the study, I cannot emphasize enough that what makes a good study is the design. There are so many times when we see studies where people rush into the lab with a half-baked idea, the results come back, they don't know how to interpret them, and then they're trying to patch it up with lots of stuff afterwards. The main area where you should be spending time is on the design. Make sure, is there something in your design that truly will allow you to ask the question that you just stated was the question for your study? Are you able to draw the causal inference that you have to with your experiment? Do you understand the mechanism? Are there other mechanisms that could be driving it? Think about all the contingencies, put it away, talk to people, present it in a brown bag at your university, or do it in your mentor group, so that you have addressed all the questions before you go into the lab. Once you're in the lab and you start gathering data, there's no backing out. Okay, so, and when I encourage you to think about the contingencies, I'm not encouraging you to throw everything in a study. Maybe I'll need some risk aversion. Maybe I'll need some altruism. Understand why you need altruism. Understand why you need risk aversion. Make sure that your question is tailored to the experiment you're planning to do. Another thing that we're seeing increasingly is for the top 5 journals, it is no longer, at least very rarely, enough just to have a lab experiment. Most of the top 5 studies now have either multiple lab experiments, most of them are backed up by theory. It's often backed up with some kind of field data as well, or field experiment or secondary data. So think broadly about what are the components you can put together so that you get that one end-all study that people are going to be looking at moving forward. Now, finally, just in terms of sharing your findings, I think we also, just like I think we rush into the experiment, I think we also often rush to write the papers. When you get your results, make sure that you find that one picture that can tell you a story. Make sure that you have a quick elevator pitch that you can walk up when you see Catherine Eckel at a conference, go up and say, oh, I found this really cool result. But now, as much as you want to tell Catherine Eckel about the finding, that finding should be 2 minutes. I still remember being at an ESA conference on a boat tour outside of New York, and somebody kept coming up to me and opening up his computer so that I could see the 20 slides that he wanted me to look at as I'm looking over the New York skyline. So 2 minutes for your pitch is a really good way to sell an idea, and then the person will follow up with you afterwards. But think about your study before you start writing it down. Have a small presentation that gives you the structure. Of course, write it up, revise it, and then make sure you submit it. I sadly still have papers that never got to that last stage because I kept thinking I could make them better. Finally, in terms of research, because we keep talking about thinking strategically, the success of your research is not just measured in terms of the publications or just measured in terms of the citations. It's also measured on whether or not your research had impact to the point where you are seen as the expert in the area. And how are you seen as an expert? You get seminar invitations, you go to conferences to talk, you get asked to referee. Now, while it's hard to get the top 5, making sure you go to seminars and conferences and refereeing is not so hard. So sometimes getting those little points at the end will make it easier to succeed at the front part. But most importantly, remember that the research is the reward. Don't stress about getting to look perfect. You should be engaged in your research and enjoy it. Don't be too scared of whether or not it's going to work out. So that's it. I'm going to give it back to Jan. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. That was great. So our next topic is going to be teaching. If I can. Okay. So Laura Razzolini will talk about, publishing. We do have a publishing panel tomorrow, but Laura will talk more about the strategic aspect of publishing. So Laura is the chair of the econ department at the University of Alabama. So go ahead, Laura.
Hi, hello everybody. So before I go into some quick, I guess, little strategy to actually be successful at publishing, I need to say two things. One, that having had this group of 5 ladies into my peer group, I guess, and the 2 wonderful mentors has certainly made such a difference in my life that I really I can claim that I would not be where I am without their presence. So I will be forever grateful. And I really hope that for everybody, they could claim, you know, when they look 10 years post in their life and then 20, they can actually have such group of friends. Anyway, so what I'm building right on Lisa's contribution. Basically, you do what she said, and that means that you're going to have a little stock of paper at some stage work at all times. You know, some are in the idea stage, some are in the, you know, I'm working through the results or collecting data stage, some are writing them. Now, the easiest, and we're blessed because especially our group, our particular field in economics, actually doesn't look with disfavor of collaboration. So my biggest speech here is to suggest that you, especially at the beginning of your career, work with people. And actually, this is the advice I even give to all my faculty, my younger assistant professors. Work with your advisor, first of all. That's the first person. So the first 3-4 papers that come out straight of your dissertation, just work with the advisor. Then keep moving on. You'll find co-authors in your colleagues. You'll find co-authors in your mentors or peer group. You'll find co-authors in your friends. You'll find co-authors in whoever shares some interest with you. That is going to move your research forward so much faster. And you can see that when you grew up, eventually, you keep working with co-authors. So because at this point, we just have more fun than working by ourselves. So next, when you have a paper and you start writing, please write clearly. The paper should have a clear message, maybe just one basic question. And so the reader can get 2 things. First of all, what's the paper about? And, you know, and that's what it is. Short paper are so much better than longer paper. Elegantly and clearly write a paper are so much better than confused papers. Then, of course, balance quality and quantity. You know, don't hang on your job market paper forever as it goes, you know, from top 5 to top 5 to top 5. At some point, it can go to something lower and you can move on with life. So in this respect, and I guess the seminar that you're going to have tomorrow will help you, it's good to target the manuscript to the journal. And in this, there is nothing wrong in asking for help to, you know, your mentor, your senior professor in your department, senior people in the profession. Present your paper as much as you can, because I have to tell you, you don't submit a paper to get comments. Because editors don't do comments. Editors publish papers and that's it. And they want to publish good papers. So what you do, you get comments by presenting your paper or asking for help to your colleague, friends, and people more senior to you in the profession. Then finally, you need to keep trying. When the paper comes back, so everybody gets rejection, famous people get rejection, we get rejections, we get more rejection than we get acceptances. So just keep submitting the paper. And here, it's very important, when you get referee reports, please address the comments. the probability that you're going to get the same reviewer when you submit it to a different journal is pretty high. It's certainly not zero. So what would you do if you get a paper that you just rejected, or you just wrote a bunch of comments and you get exactly the same version at another journal? It certainly does not make the reviewer happy. So the strategy, I think, is to address the comments. The one that makes sense, please address it by all means. The one that you may not agree completely, just address it somehow with some line that makes the reviewer think that at least you thought about the comment. So revise, don't simply resubmit. Then I think I want to say one more thing about letters to the editor. Okay, editor, in my experience, don't read letters. So don't spend much time writing letters. So really seriously, don't worry about writing a letter to the editor, certainly not through the automated system when you submit a paper. If there's something important that you have to say, then maybe a personal email could be better, but of course here people could disagree. However, only the tough get going because it's a tough process. Please write clearly. That's basically the bottom line, because once we get a paper that is very nicely written, we understand exactly what they're doing. It is short and sweet. We just love the exercise of reading the paper, and we're going to seriously be so much nicer in our refereeing. So good luck to all, and keep submitting papers. And Jan, that's to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So we're going to move to teaching, and Sara Solnick will discuss the teaching aspect. So Sara is the chair of the econ department at the University of Vermont. So yours, Sara.
Yes, hi, thank you. So everyone has been saying that teaching is, not the top priority, which I completely agree with. The advice that I want to give is not to pour more time into it. In fact, it's the opposite. It's that if you can do it more efficiently, you want to put your effort in where you're going to get results, and then have it be good enough, and not keep on polishing up that gem, but feel satisfied with it and proceed. So this first piece of advice is very similar to what people have also said about the research side, which is that expectations are really different across the landscape of academia in terms of how important teaching is going to be to your promotion. So you need to be aware of that. And then what is expected in any individual department is really different than other departments in terms of, how many courses do they expect you to prepare? What should those courses look like? And, for a lot of the things in terms of, the advice I have is don't try to guess, don't try to figure it out by yourself. Ask people, people will share their syllabi, and you want to make your class fit right in to what else, all the other courses in the department. So it's part of the curriculum. It is building on what the students know from their previous courses. It is giving them what they need to know to go to the next courses, and it fits in. So that way you're not doing more than what you should. I also think that when people, part of what makes teaching take up a lot of time is if you don't do it well, right? Because then you're kind of struggling with students coming in with questions. And not being able to kind of really smoothly just work through the material and get through your class. So the next point is to be organized. I think this really echoes also what Lise said about research. I mean, we have ideas about things to do, and you should have some kind of system, maybe a document where you put those ideas in so that the next time you come around to that lecture a year later, or you saw an article that really fit and you want to include it next time, that you save it, because otherwise, like, I spent time trying to Google that thing that I remember seeing, and then I'm spending time that I shouldn't have to spend. In terms of teaching, yeah, you want to use your class time really wisely so that you're moving the students forward. You want to think about, like, I think a lot of this is, things that are true on the macro level are true on the micro level in terms of you're thinking about where you want your career to be, how you're going to get there. In a class, in the whole course, you want to think about, well, what do you want your students to know at the end? Where did they start and where do you want them to go, and how are you going to get them there? And then you can also break that down to every single class session. What am I doing in this class session? And students really appreciate those classes that are very structured in that way, and they don't feel like they're wasting their time there. They feel like you know what you're doing because you have that intention that you have planned. My third point, how you'll be evaluated, and this was sort of touched on in terms of the peer evaluations, the student evaluations. What does that look like? You can see what that instrument is, and find out what are your peers looking for. You can often invite people to give you, to come sit in on your class and not write a letter, but just give you the informal feedback. And I think some people are really great at teaching, and some of you are probably already, very, very accomplished, very successful teachers. For a lot of people, it's not necessarily super easy to do. And what you want to do is, build on your strengths, play to your strengths, and you want to find, you don't want to keep doing things wrong. You want to find out what the issues are and try to correct those things so that you're really, again, you're putting your effort to what's going to make a difference and what's going to enable you to do the best you can, in the time that you have, because you've got so many other things that also need to be attended to. And then, if your evaluations are positive, you've got it locked in, you've got it figured out, that's great. If not, every institution will have a Center for Teaching and Learning. They'll have some kind of resources, and you should go to that place. And again, if you're thinking about what some of the earlier speakers said in terms of your portfolio, teaching is probably not going to kill your tenure prospects at most places, unless you really don't care. If they see you trying and doing the best you can with, whatever you're given, they want to make the case for you. If you're sort of, and I've seen this, I've seen people who, we tell them what's wrong, they don't do anything about it, and then the objective is kind of like to get that person out because they're destructive to our program. So what you want to do is, even if things are not like, absolutely golden, that you're trying, you care, and there are things, like it's not magic. There are resources where you can make some small changes and really improve and be good enough. And research is fun. I mean, teaching can also be fun. I mean, it's in some ways it's a chore. It's, we've got to keep on showing up to class. There's like a factory mentality to it in a way with our teaching schedule, but it can be very rewarding. We are in contact with students that have questions. We can pass on our love of the subject, so it can be very inspiring and enjoyable. When you really feel like, hey, I presented what I wanted to do. I had everything together. My examples were good, and the students really got it. That's a great feeling too. So thanks.
All right, thank you, Sarah. So now we're going to move to service, and Betsy Hoffman will discuss the service topic. So Betsy is a professor of economics at Iowa State University. Before that, she took a large number of leadership positions, including the president of the University of Colorado. So Betsy, it's yours.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see, sort of, quote unquote, see all of you. Service is a very interesting component of your portfolio. Service will not get you tenure, but bad service or no service can get you not tenured. So it's one of those things that has a one-tailed experience. So most departments try to limit the service of junior faculty, although some, if you're at a teaching institution, you'll probably be expected to do more service. If you're at a top institution, you'll probably be expected to do less service. In between, you're probably expected to do some service. But there's a variety of different kinds of things you can do. It's very important to have the department feel as though you care about what's happening. But you want to limit your service obligations to something that you care about. so that you can put in the time, but also do a good job. So one of the things to talk with your department chair about is pick a committee that you want to be on. And then be on that committee and try to do the best job you can, but try to help get your department chair to help you respond to other requests. So one of the things of being a women or a minority faculty is that everybody wants us on committees because they all want to check off the box that their committee includes representation. But as a junior faculty member, your department chair should protect you from that kind of piling up of service. And you shouldn't be asked to do college or university committees unless it's something you particularly want to do. And then you should be allowed to go off something else. But I really recommend for junior faculty at research universities, be on at least one committee for your department, talk with your department chair about what that should be, and try to avoid getting put, I'm sorry, don't want to do a double negative. Try to avoid being put on college or university committees until you're either close to tenure or just tenured. But it's really important to also get to know your profession, which is, I can't remember which of my colleagues talked about, but it is important. It's important to go to conferences. It's important to get known in your profession, volunteer to be a committee chair, to be a reader of papers. And there's one question I got was, should you referee? And the answer is absolutely you should referee. But again, you should limit the amount of refereeing you do. And if you agree to referee a paper, do it, and do it in the time that is required. So if I get a letter from, say, the AEA or GBO asking me to referee a particular paper, typically they'll give me a time limit. They'll say, can you finish this referee report in, say, 2 months? And if I have time, I will say yes. Now, when I was a university professor, I said no all the time, unless it was writing a letter for one of my mentees or refereeing a paper that I was really interested in. I just said no all the time. But now that I'm back on the faculty, I say yes more often. But I look at my calendar and I say, how long do I have? Is it possible that I can get this referee report done, do it well in the time that they're asking? And if the answer is yes, then you have to do it. So I put it on my calendar, however it works for you. I put deadlines on my calendar. And then a week or 2 weeks before the deadline, I'll put on a reminder. Remember, this referee report is due at such and such a day. So then say 2 weeks before, if I haven't already done it, I will read the paper. And a week before, I'll start writing my referee report so that I can turn it in on time. So that's really important. If you get a reputation for not meeting your referee assignments, that's worse than not doing it at all. So you know yourself, you know whether you're somebody who can actually meet deadlines like this. And if you are somebody who can meet deadlines like this, accept those referee assignments in a limited amount and then do it on time. Choose your service assignments carefully. You want to pay attention to, one, visibility. I think one of us mentioned, be sure that you can document it. Is this something important? Can you do it? And is this something that will give you some status in the department or the profession? Those of us, women and minorities, tend to get asked by the community to do service. I really recommend waiting until you have tenure. So one of the things that I've recommended to all my mentees, most of whom are here with me virtually today, is you will have plenty of time in your life to do service, to chair CSWEP, or I think it's important to work with other women and help to mentor, but those leadership roles, you have plenty of time in your life So wait until you have tenure, when you have some degree of ability, when you have some time to do it without fear that you're not going to get tenure. So you want to practice say no. You want to talk with your department chair about trade-offs. So I remember when I was at Purdue, I'd actually just gotten tenure, but I was asked to take on this very large service responsibility to design a whole new major we were in the business school, and the College of Arts and Sciences wanted to have an econ major. And so I was asked to chair a committee that would design an arts and sciences econ major. But it would have been the 7th committee I was on. And so I talked to, at that point, we didn't have department chairs, it was associate dean. And I said to him, if you take me off one of the committees I'm on, I will agree to do it. And so you want to have a feeling for, if you're on more than one committee, what is the more important or the less important committee to be on? So if you get asked to do, say right after tenure, this kind of a major service activity, then you have something to give to your department chair to say, if you take me off this committee, I'll be on the other. So if it's urgent, again, negotiate to get out of other assignments. And if it's particularly interesting, the same. So let me just leave you with a thought. Service is important because academics really run the university, and we want to keep running the university. We don't want to leave the university to the people who are not academics. But wait until you have tenure to take on major service obligations. However, if you come up for tenure and you have no service, or you're known for being a shirker or a really terrible person, unpleasant, doesn't get any work done, that can hurt your chance to get tenure. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Jan.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. So we're running a bit over time, short. So I don't want to cut too much into Q&A. So I'll talk very briefly about networking and letter writers. So some of the panelists have to leave because of panels, small group meetings right afterwards. So feel free to leave whenever you need to. For those who do not have immediate meetings, maybe we can hang out for another 10 minutes so that we can address some of the questions. So let me go to the piece about how to network with senior colleagues, and that include your future letter writers. During the tenure process, like a couple of months before, your department chair will ask you to nominate a number of senior people. So in my school, it's about 6 to be your letter writers. And they're very important, meaning the letters are important in the tenure promotion process. You should know whom you would like to write your letters early on, so you can make sure that they know your work. You can send them your working papers and publications, but don't just email, spam people. You want to say, if it's relevant, your paper is cited on page X. I bet that they will at least read page X and see how they're cited. This is a good way to network. It's actually also for error correction. I remember when I was an assistant professor, I once sent a working paper to John Eckel and said, your paper is cited on page 17 also. And he actually wrote back and said, well, that's not what I meant, so this is not quite the right interpretation. So I corrected it. But he also said, would you like to come to Pittsburgh to give a seminar? So that was my first seminar at Pittsburgh. And right now it's a strange time to talk about this, but if we start the physical conference again, introduce yourself at conferences, show up and be active, ask questions. Make sure that you invite your future letter writers to come to your institution for a seminar. And this is the second point is not often mentioned, which is you can invite yourself to give a seminar at other institutions. Lots of seminars are now open to the rest of the world, and many people notice that they tend to be big names. What if you're a junior person? You know, lots of institutions also have these lab groups, which are informal seminars. And when people invite themselves, when we, you know, have finished the planning of the year's seminar, we actually would look at the work, and if it's a good fit, we would invite the junior person to come and give a talk at our lab group, or sometimes at our seminars for the following year. So do make sure that if you have a polished paper, send it to the senior person and ask if you can give a seminar at their institution. You can offer to self-finance if necessary. So also the last part is you want to find out senior people's reputation in letter writing. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but people, their tendencies of people sometimes tend to be more negative, and you want to make sure that you know that. And the last part is about networking with peers. So this is more about, I'm talking now to members of the mentoring group. So what networking can do is it helps improve your research. You can get feedback on your research design when you present at lab meetings. But this is a process of generalized reciprocity. How do you make your mentoring group work? You want to make sure that you are responsive to others' emails. You give and you give comments, and you will receive comments. Share information about conferences from your network, which other mentees might not be familiar with. And that's what we did for our group back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And get together at conferences for mini mentoring sessions. So whenever the 5 of us attended an ESA session, someone would oftentimes circulate a working paper or a grant proposal ahead of time. And we set up, we set aside an hour, for instance, before dinner to go through the grant proposal or the working paper. So to make this a productive experience for you, I highly recommend that, everybody should put in the work to make your mentoring group work. So now we're going to move to the Q&A session. So let me see. What you can do is there are questions in the Q&A tab. You can also raise your hand, like you raise your virtual hand. If no one's raising their hand now, I can. Okay, so Stephanie.
Jan, can I make a really quick? So Alessandra's and my mentoring group is supposed to meet right now.
Yeah.
We're going to delay 15 minutes just so that they don't sign off, so we can do the Q&A.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you, Lisa. So let me.
I think Beelor had a question.
And there are a couple of hands up.
Okay, so let me, this is a little bit, okay, so Stephanie Heather, you can talk. You can unmute yourself.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. My question is about service, and I know that Betsy said that, what service appeals to you is going to be different for every person, but I would be curious to hear from the panel members which type of service activities they have found most rewarding, particularly earlier in the career. I mean, certain service responsibilities might be more relevant for junior people.
I'm happy to answer that one. I've found being in recruiting to be incredibly rewarding because it exposed me to all the new research and gave me a chance to meet all the newest people who are coming on the market. So I thought that was, it took a lot of work, but it also was quite beneficial from my perspective because it helped me get really good colleagues later on. So I would say being on recruiting is a very valuable committee. I was also asked to be on lovely committees like the website committee. I declined that one. So I've also been asked to be on the committee for committees. That is not a particularly rewarding committee to be on. So it's really, I think the things where you are going to be visible, where you're going to improve the environment for yourself, and where the commitment is limited. I totally agree with Betsy that getting on university committees is not a good thing to do before tenure.
So let me add something there. In my department, we have decided to put our junior people on the seminar committee. The reason being that they can then invite some people they want to come, so they can be specific. When I first returned to the faculty, I was asked to be on the seminar committee. And I tried to find out what the junior people wanted, but it made much more sense to put the junior people on the seminar committee, because then they could be sure that they got 1 or 2 people each semester or each year whom they wanted to have read their stuff, come and talk. And then they got to go to breakfast, lunch, or dinner and talk with them, or cocktails or stuff, and talk with the visitor. So I think that's worked very well. And I agree with you that recruiting is that's one of the things I did as a junior faculty, was recruiting. And I can't emphasize enough the value of going to conferences and being part of your profession. If you do something for your profession, that can be documented on your tenure packet, and it's both good service and it's good networking at the same time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Sherry, Sherry, go. You're unmuted, so go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you to every panelist for the great advice. So one thing that we're facing in common now is the COVID-19, and there are some effects, negative effects of it onto the research of the junior faculty. For example, in my case, I have one project using undergrads as subjects have to be postponed because of the school closure. And in another project, I look at decision-making among elderly adults. So if all these 2 projects have to be postponed, it will be great if I can be pointed to some resources that can help alleviate the negative effects.
So I'm going to take that one, because I don't have enough money to actually have my students doing very much in-person, student research. So we have gone to using Mechanical Turk, but also Qualtrics has a panel, and our statistics program does a research service where they have panels. So Qualtrics will do it for $4 a returned, $4 a cleaned and accepted data point. And then you have what you have to pay the subjects in addition to that. MTurk is even cheaper than that. So it may not be what you had decided to do in advance, but it may be what you have to do for a while. I'll let the others who use student subjects all the time weigh in.
I can say something about this. We've developed a procedure in our lab where we combine the use of Zoom with an experimental program. So subjects log into Zoom and into the program. We do the instructions by Zoom. We anonymize them in Zoom, and they can see each other just like they would be able to see each other in a lab. And we can monitor what they're doing. That is, they're not, having a party or anything like that. But it kind of combines some aspects of the lab and not the lab. We're able to recruit from our existing subject pool. And that works out pretty well. I also wanted to mention that Erin Krupka at the University of Michigan has compiled a list of resources and responses that people gave to her when she posted something on the ESA Discuss list. So that might be useful to look at. And I recently saw that Dan Friedman put something out about the procedure they've developed at Santa Cruz. So I think that there are ways to get most of our work done. We have a lab that's focused on process data, eye tracking, skin conductance, things like that. You can't do those online. That's really a problem. But I think for most of the kind of research we do, there are ways to do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to actually ask something of the panelists. So we're considering, for instance, give assistant professors a tenure extension because of COVID.
Our university has guaranteed at least a year.
Okay.
As has Minnesota, and I think many of the Big Ten universities. I'd be surprised if Michigan does not.
And
At Texas A&M, you have to ask.
Okay.
Yeah, at Alabama you have to ask, but
You have to ask, but it's
automatic.
to be automatically guaranteed, granted.
Yeah. I think in general you can. You should probably think about moving some of the experiments online. So MTurk is one option. The other option is Dynata, which used to be Research Now. There you can recruit a representative sample of the population in a certain country. You get to set it yourself, and you can also, for instance, if you want to study seniors, Sherry, as you talked about, you can set the age limit, so you can basically set counters to recruit subjects there.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a comment here.
I will ask Erin to for her resource that she summarized, and I'm going to post it somewhere. I'll send an email about posting the resource.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Daniel Lee had a question in the Q&A section. Did you? I unmuted you, so you should be able to talk. Okay, so
Where did he go?
no, so Georgia, I unmuted you.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, hello, let me just say one more time, thank you. I think you all know how important what you're doing is, but let me just highlight it one more time. So the question I wanted to ask is the trade-offs between working in one research topic and working on a variety of topics. And given what Lisa said, that we should be still passionate about what we do, see this as a 7-year post. It's a little hard when you're focusing on it in one research area to find things interesting again and again. So I don't know, I would like to know more of your experience. I mean, I'm trying to build a reputation in one field, and I found another field lately that excites me very much, and I feel like I'm cheating to my original research field if I write papers or read papers about it. So I would like your feedback on that, and from your experience, what have you seen so far? Thanks.
I'm happy to answer that. When you come off a tenure, you have to write a research statement, and you have to be able to say who you are and what is the research that you've done. And I guess I found it much easier to write that research statement because different parts of my research sort of all tied together. It doesn't mean that every paper I wrote fit into that rubric. There's lots of things that didn't fit in. But there were two main themes, and it just made it easy for me to talk about who I was, and it made it easier for other people to talk about who I was. And it doesn't mean that you're asking the same question over and over. It means that as you dig deeper and deeper, there are different questions that pop up that you didn't know were there before. So it's more, I think it's easier to spend the amount of time that is needed for your research if you care deeply about the answers, because then you keep going. So it's like you peel off one layer, and suddenly when you peel that layer away, you can see things underneath that you couldn't see before. So it makes it much easier to come up with new research questions. It's much easier to, be excited about the data that you're getting pretty much no matter what it shows, because you just want to know the answers yourself. So it is not to say, if you come up with a great research question and it doesn't fit within your, area of expertise, that you shouldn't pursue it. But I do think as you're coming up for tenure, to think about how things fit together, who you are as a scholar. I find it very difficult to write letters of recommendations for people who are coming out or tenure letters for people who have 6 different papers in 6 different areas. I don't know what they care about. And I know that a university, if they're going to invest in you as a scholar, need to know who you are. And if I can't tell that as an expert in the field, they will not be able to tell either. So it is tempting to just do lots of different things. I do think that there are large returns to really trying to stay focused. So I think Rachel.
So let me chime in here too. I think one tactic that was really helpful for me was not saying yes and not saying no, but saying later. So I was sort of, I had what was described to me when I was at Wharton was, you need to be the #1 person in some field. You need to be, top in this subdiscipline. And and realistically, I was not the #1 economist in the world, right? I was not even the #1 experimental economist in the world because I had these other women to compete with. So you have to sort of find that niche where you are in the tippy top. And when other opportunistic papers came along that I really wanted to pursue, it was really hard for me to say no. But what I said was, how about I put that project off for a couple of years until after my tenure packet goes in, and then I will do them. And that was a way for me to kind of come to terms with, both, and I was continuing to pursue my passion because I cared deeply about the topics that I was already researching, but that enabled me to advance those papers enough without having to turn things down that I also cared about. So maybe that'll be helpful.
I mean, I think this is a place where if you have senior mentors, they could be really helpful, because if you're talking about this new area, but maybe it is an outgrowth of what you previously been doing. Like maybe you're like, I focused on this, but now in the bigger picture, I'm still doing that, but it means I now am looking at this other thing also. If it fits together, then that's brilliant, and that shows a developing scholar. If it's really, a random new thing, then I would definitely advise to wait. But I think that's where, advice from, an experienced person is going to help you sort through that and really help you determine, where you want to put your time and your focus now.
It's also true that other people, that it may not be obvious how papers fit together, but you may understand how they fit together. And you can explain that when you write your research statement. So it may be that 2 topics look really different, but you see some connection with them, between them, and you can explain that when you do your research statement.
Yeah. So let me just ask Daniel Lee to ask his question. He's raised his hands for a while. So let's make this the last question. And I know many of you will be going into your mentoring group, so continue to ask the questions to your mentoring group. Yeah. Daniel,
thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
So thank you all for hosting this panel. I was wondering if you might have any advice or strategies for generalizing your advice to those of us who are at smaller schools where we might not have the travel resources and the seminar resources that you've been referring to throughout the panel.
So during this time when everything is virtual, it's a wonderful opportunity to, for instance, we're putting on a virtual seminar series this fall, which means we're not spending any money to bring people to campus. So, if as long as your campus is partially shut down, so we're going to try to have students in the fall. I'm not terribly confident that will actually work, but we're going to have all our seminar series is going to be virtual. So nobody's going to be coming to campus. So this would be a great time to make contact with some people and say, if you're having a virtual seminar, I would love to present. And so you don't get to go to dinner, lunch and dinner and cocktails, but you get a chance to show off the work that you're doing.
I also would like to steal one of Betsy's advice from an earlier mentoring panel, which is to invest in yourself.
Yes.
You can. So when I was an assistant professor, sometimes if I think I would really would like to present at UCSD, I would email a senior colleague and say, I have this working paper which I really like to present at your institution. Can I pay my own way? So I sort of feel bad saying this, but it is really worthwhile for you to, pay it, from your private funds. So it's we're running out of time, actually overtime. So thanks to all of our panelists and also to our participants for attending. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yan, for organizing this.
Thank you, Yan.
Thanks to all the participants.
Yeah, thanks to all the participants.